everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we're going to be talking about charge, your energy and your body. And we have Anodea Judith here talking about her book, Charge and the Energy Body. Yay! Welcome, Anodea. I have to tell you this, as I was saying before we met, this is one of the most one of the best written books I've read on energy, honestly, and I've read a lot of books on
Oh my
energy.
goodness, thank you so much. That's high
Yeah.
praise. I'm honored.
Yes, I love it. So, one of the things that I started reading and getting really excited about, not only because I used to work in high tech, was your description about the energy system and how you related it to that's near and dear to my heart, computer systems. And I thought, oh my gosh, this describes it perfectly. And I was wondering if you can do kind of a quick overview of the energy system and how, in such a beautiful way that you articulated it.
Certainly. Well, in the book, I refer to energy as analogous to the electricity that runs through our computers. So, in this world, we have a lot of separation between mind and body. And we think mental health is something that just has to do with the brain. And then we go to a doctor for physical health that has nothing to do with the mind. And they're very separate. But what really connects mind and body, if you take the example of a computer, you've got your hardware,
Hmm.
and that is your Mac or your PC or your cell phone or your desktop. And onto that, you have installed a lot of software. So
Hmm.
I have my hardware. I happen to be female in this lifetime.
Your body is your hardware.
Right, I'm as
Right.
tall as I am, and I have my muscles and bones and, my organs, and that's all my hardware. And onto that hardware, since the day I was born, I have had all kinds of software installed, most of it not my choosing, you know, being, programmed by culture and parents and all that. And then, of course, as we grow up, we try to become aware of that software and we make changes and try to get the bugs out.
Hmm.
But what connects the hardware and the software is the energy going through the system. So you could buy the latest iPhone and you could load it with all your pictures and your phone numbers and your music and all that. And if your battery goes dead and there's no charge going through the cell phone, none of that is any good whatsoever.
Hmm.
It's only when there's a charge going through the system that the software can access the hardware and create the information you want.
Right.
So our mind and its programming is telling our life force energy where to go in the body and where not to go. If I'm standing in
Oh,
front of a group of people, it says, pull in your stomach, pull your shoulders back, stand up
right.
straight,
Right.
smile,
Right.
and that's my programming telling my life force where to go and where not to. And it might say, don't go down to that realm of feelings. You don't want to feel what's in there. And then I keep energy out of that lower chakra, for example.
Okay, so the system is this energy, which is actually where we're going to route our energy. Is that what you said? Is that right?
Yes,
And then
programming tells our energy where to go and where not to go.
okay, that's the programming, and then we have our beliefs, which is our operating system. That's
Our
part of it too.
operating system, that's right. Yeah, they tell us how to operate. So if you believe studying energy is important, for example, that belief will lead you to put your attention on certain books or take workshops or put attention on your own life force. And if you believe it's good to eat a certain way, that's how you'll operate. And
Hmm.
if you believe that it's good to treat people a certain way, you have some moral beliefs, then we operate according to that. So that's our operating system.
Hmm.
And you know from being in tech that the operating system is what interprets everything that happens.
Right. So we have an operating system that's interpreting the world around us. We have these programs that are kind of running automatically. We kind of don't even know what they're doing anymore because they've been doing it like drive the kids to school is my program that's running. And then we have this body, which is the hardware in which all this is actually installed. And it's all working together through energy.
All working together through energy.
And
Take the
you call it
energy away
charge. Yeah.
and take the energy away and you have a corpse.
Yes.
You don't have a living person. Take the body away and you have a ghost.
All right. So, one of the things in you were talking about the seventh chakra, and what I loved is that you described about in that chakra kind of how you want your energy to move inward and upward. Help me help, and I'm going to do an awful job explaining, but you're talking about kind of where our energy should be going directionally up and down, around, and can you tell us if there's an ideal version of where it should go, and then versus where it does go? And then I want to talk to you about blocks because I thought that
Yeah.
that was fascinating.
So we know that energy is flowing through the whole system and you can measure it. And it goes through the meridians of acupuncture. And that has been demonstrated for 5,000 years. And it also moves through the connective tissue. Connective tissue, connects our muscles to our bones, and that's electrically conductive.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that energy moves through the connective tissue, and actually that gives us our shape.
Mm.
If the connective tissue in my shoulders is tight, then my shoulders are rounded and I have a shape that blocks my heart chakra, for example. But ultimately, we want to run energy through the central highway, which is the core that runs between the crown and the base.
Mm-hmm.
And not only the torso, but the arms have a core, the legs have a core, everything has a core. So when I teach yoga and have people on their mat, I'm saying run it through your core. If you're in, for instance, downward dog pose where you're on both your hands and feet at the same time with your butt up, then, you're pressing into your hands, you're running energy through the core of your arms.
Right. And then the core of your legs too when you're doing
That's right.
downward dog.
That's right.
Okay, got it. So the core is not just the central core that runs up and down. There's several kind of cores that run up. I assume it's in your appendage, like the appendages, and then also.
Sure.
Okay, got
But
it.
you could say every cell has a core for that
Okay.
matter.
Okay.
But we're talking about the major highways. And then when you come into the core, up the center of the torso, into the head, that's where we find the chakras.
Okay, got it. And why does it matter that why doesn't our why don't we just snake all over? Like, why should we take the major superhighway? What's the benefit of having our energy run in this pattern and up and down the cores?
Well, for one thing, it's the shortest distance between heaven and earth. So
Okay.
if you want to go across a bridge from north to south or south to north, you want to take a bridge that's going to go straight across. That's the quickest way to get there.
Right.
It's not that you have to do that, but it is the most cohesive, coherent way to run your energy.
Okay.
And so when we work in bioenergetics, which is a therapeutic modality working with energy, we talk about how important it is to be in the center of your charge. So when you're in the center of your charge, you're in charge.
Okay, got it. Versus, let's say that I'm like, oh, are you okay? Oh, did you fall down? Also, my energy is like reaching outwards and who knows what in other kind of directions. And then in that case, I'm no longer in my core. My energy is outward. And what happens when my energy is, oh, my kid fell down. Oh, or got into a car accident.
I say that core stands for consciousness organized in relation to energy. So what you described is exactly right. We jump out of our core. Oh, my kid, or oh, will you love me? Or
Right.
oh, there's, something I want to buy or whatever.
Right.
And we also shrink away. Oh, here's a person I'm afraid of, or here's some
Right.
toxic energy. I don't want to do that. So we shrink away. And of course, we do that from the time we're little itty bitty as we're forming our body. So then the core gets kind of,
Meandering.
and we aren't in the center of our core. And then other people, you'll see the charge come up. Maybe they hit an emotional charge or something, and then they take their head off to the side, or they're turning this way or that way, or, they're coming out of the center in order to actually minimize the experience.
So we're not in our power then. I mean, I know we're not in our power, but we actually are not in our core. And then is it when we move from that core, I assume that we actually move from our wisdom, our inner wisdom of some sort, or some kind of higher intelligence because we're moving out? Or what would you say is the benefit of staying in the core?
Well, the benefit of staying in the core is that the energy becomes coherent. There's a sense to it. It's organized. We are in the center of ourselves. We don't lose our ground. We don't lose our center. We don't lose our power. We don't lose touch with our heart. We stay in touch with our truth. All the chakras that's where they are. So that's where they're activated in a way that's most balanced.
Okay, got it.
I talk about excessive chakras and deficient chakras. And in a sense, excessive chakras are a compensating strategy. Like if you didn't get enough love growing up, maybe you want to be the center of attention all the time because you're trying to make up for that. That would be an excessive heart chakra. And excessive chakras jump out in front of the core.
Oh, that's fascinating. So I may be like, oh, so I've like, pay attention to me. It would actually be, so like the first line when you're encountering me would be this part, the heart that's like, look at me. Don't you like my dress or whatever it is?
Exactly. And you're not in your truth. Now, deficient chakras, by contrast, they are an avoidant response. It says, oh, I don't know if I should open my mouth and say anything here. I think I'll just shrink back and keep my mouth shut. And so deficient chakras pull us to the back of the core, like not even the core, but behind it.
Right. Okay. And when we're doing that, then it's another, it sounds like it's another, I'm trying to sense of what it's like, another way of defending ourselves. Or
it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one is kind of compensating because like I didn't get enough attention, so now I have to figure out some way of creating attention, and the other is like I don't even want attention because I'm just trying to. So one is like compensating, one is kind of avoidant. I can't remember what you call it in the book.
Yeah, avoidant. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Or you could say the same thing about power. You felt powerless as a child. Maybe you compensated by having to be in control of everything and managing and being in a powerful position in your work and, managing everybody and telling them what to do. Or somebody went the other way, deficient, and said, well, whatever.
Right. Do whatever you want. Yeah.
Just give up my will. I'm not going to try. What's the use? Right. And that would be deficient, going to a powerless place or an overcompensating power place.
Right. Versus if you're in neither this place or this place, but in the core, it seems like you have more range of possibility of how you could react. You could be responding kind of to whatever the situation is versus like reacting, like this way or this way.
Exactly. And then your energy is more coherent.
Okay. That's what you mean about coherent. Okay. So that's that's ideally how this whole body, operating system and programs, like if the ideal center is to be in the center in the core.
Yeah.
Okay. And there is another idea, which is this Kundalini arising, where heaven and earth meet together, I guess.
Yes.
And so when that happens, you have, is Kundalini arise? Does it arise when our chakras are blocked, or what in your model, when does it arise?
Well, Kundalini is a mystery.
Okay.
And no one really understands what it is completely. But theoretically, it represents a serpent because when it comes through you, you kind of move back and forth like this, and you can feel a kind of trembling energy. So that's why it's called a serpent. And it is said that the serpent is coiled 3.5 times around the base chakra, the first chakra, the earth chakra. And that when the energy is stimulated, then the serpent starts to wake up and she goes like this and she pierces and penetrates each chakra and brings it open. So what Kundalini is really concentrated energy or charge. And it's so concentrated, it can push through the blocks.
Okay. All right, so one of my teachers is a Kundalini Shakti teacher. So I've often wondered, because you're in your book, it's a very gentle and kind of conscious process of opening up gradually, opening and releasing. It's just this beautiful, like I envision a flower, opening slowly and closing. And the Kundalini Shakti with the teacher is kind of like, like it's just. So what do you see as kind of the is there a risk or cautionary tale for doing it in this particular way? Or when you, like, I've always wondered myself, even as part of the practice, when someone goes through this kind of like Drano, right? Or
yeah, exactly.
Right? Or like someone basically, we have a new subway system in Seattle. It's called Sound Transit, and they have a boring machine that's just like, like
Oh
bores
yeah,
through whatever is in its path. So this
that's
is
right.
kind of, do you see that without kind of, this kind of beautiful softening, opening, is there a risk for some people to have it just drained out through like that?
Well, there is. And the risk, I have had many people come to me over the years for healing sessions because their Kundalini went awry. They
Mm.
couldn't sleep anymore, or they couldn't do this, or they're having visions and they weren't normal, and, it wouldn't settle down. And
Mm.
so Kundalini usually is a rising. They say Kundalini rises from the base chakra up to the crown. It doesn't descend. It's not a grounding energy. So what happens
Yes.
to people that don't have a strong ground or have a lot of trauma in their body is
Mm.
that it gets them very ungrounded and it activates their trauma. And if
Oh.
there's a lot of trauma, you don't want to activate that. You want to heal that by letting out the charge of the trauma more slowly.
Ah, interesting. So if you've actually had a traumatic experience, it's like re-experiencing the trauma, or is it like kind of just hitting at that and kind of bursting it open, like a my husband had like a kidney stone, and it's like, and like who knows, it blasted open some big chunks, some small chunks, some that are really hard to
Exactly.
process through your system, some are that are easy and pass easily. So it sounds like it's kind of that kind of.
It's similar to that. I mean, you can think of it as going into a jail and letting everybody out. And some people are in there who are falsely accused, and did nothing to hurt anybody, and other people are hardline killers.
Okay, I get
So
it.
if you have this indiscriminate opening. But another way to answer that is say, let's look at what happens to charge in the case of trauma.
Yes.
So
Okay.
trauma is basically when something awful happens that you're powerless to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what happens in the body is the charge arises for the purpose of you taking care of yourself,
Right.
running away to safety, fighting off the attacker. Maybe it comes into your hands to stop somebody. Maybe it comes into your legs to run away. Maybe it comes into your throat to scream. But for some reason, because of the situation, those pathways of discharge are blocked.
Mm-hmm.
So a little child can't run away because there's no place to go.
Mm-hmm.
They can't fight their dad because their dad is, huge and much bigger than they are, and they'll get into worse trouble. They can't scream because no one will hear. There's
Right.
some reason these are blocked, and so the high charge of that then gets frozen.
Ah, and that's the blocking the stimulants, the tension, or that's blocking the stimulants. Is that right? You said you talked about four
It's actually,
blocks.
yeah, the 4 blocks of the charge discharge cycle. It
Okay.
would probably be blocking at the discharge place. So the
Ah, okay.
charge rises in trauma to its
Right.
full height,
Yes.
but then it gets locked up right
Right.
there.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And it doesn't get to discharge. So in trauma work, we call it a trauma vortex. It
Mm-hmm.
spins around. It might
Yes.
spin around in your thoughts. So your thoughts are a kaleidoscope, but you can't think straight.
Yes.
It might spin around in your belly. So you get these somersaults in your belly going around and around, but you can't do anything. It might spin around in your heart, and your heart beats really, really fast, because you're scared, but you can't get that to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So when charge comes through the system, it can reinforce the blocks and those that we make. And
Ah, I get it. Interesting. So if it's like, hey, you're not going anywhere, it's like,
yeah,
ah, okay, I get it. All right, so I I have a real example, but I want to put it through the model that you talk about the charges and discharges because I found that whole chapter fascinating. So what's the process if we were to just let everything flow naturally? How would it? And I love the example that you use of sex. So if would you mind if you went in that direction? Because I think I'm like, okay, I get that piece really
yeah, I
clearly.
think everybody can relate to
Yeah.
that. When we're talking about the charge discharge cycle, and
Yes.
I could probably find the page in the book and hold it up, maybe you can find
I
it.
will. You talk about it, and here it is.
Yeah, there are 4 stages. And
Yes.
one is the stimulus. So if we're talking about sexuality, the stimulus could be a sexy picture.
Right.
It could be a kiss.
Right.
It could be a flirtation. It could be someone's touch.
Right.
And when that happens, the charge starts to build up.
Right.
And then it goes to a stage that we call tension. So in sexuality, it's sexual tension. And ideally, foreplay is the building up of that
Right.
sexual tension.
Right.
You get more and more turned on,
Right.
and the tension builds in your body to the point of release. That would be an orgasm. And
Right.
then after the release, you slide down into a kind of relaxation. Some people
Right.
fall asleep, some people snuggle, and they have this sweet place where the tension is resolved and there is a closeness.
Ah, okay.
But you could say an argument has these stages.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you brought up that topic again. It
Right.
annoys me. I'm stimulated because you brought up that topic. And
Right.
then you argue back and the argument escalates. And then finally I just blurt out, well, you never listened to me or
Right.
whatever. And then, oh, why didn't you say so? And we kind of slide back down.
Right.
A good yoga class goes through that. You warm up and you build to a peak pose and you come down and you take shavasana. A good therapy session follows that. You touch on a topic, you build up the charge, you release it, you come down and reintegrate.
Right. And what I loved about this idea of discharge that you talk about, and I never thought about it from an energetic perspective, but you talk about anger, tears, all those, laughter. Like there's all these different ways, like orgasm. There are different ways that we discharge, and there's absolutely no judgment around it. It's just like this is a way that we get back to relaxation, and when we don't do that, then that's when the problems arise. So you talk about block stimulus, block charge, block tension, block
Binding
relaxation.
charge.
Yeah.
I talk about binding the charge.
Yeah, tell me about what those are.
When the charge can't be discharged, let's say a little child is in a volatile family and they're getting yelled at and they can't yell back.
Right.
So they can't discharge their energy.
Yeah, I'm there. Yep.
You had one of those.
Yes.
Yeah, most of us did. Then they have to bind it in some way. Binding it is like tying up a package, to mail, wrapping a string around it many, many times.
Right.
So when we bind the charge, we bind it into muscular tension. We bind it into fat in the body. So some people have to create a very large body because they had to contain so much charge. The body is a storage battery for charge. So a big body can store more charge than a little body. And that's neither good nor bad. It's just what's so. Like a D cell battery can store more than a AAA.
Right.
The AAA charges up quicker.
Right.
If it's a reach.
That's a perfect way, because you were talking about the different character structures. Now I get it. So different types of bodies and how they respond to the charge. Okay. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So the
we bind charge into muscular tension, excess weight, addictions, smoking or eating too much or, gambling, if that's what it is. There are ways of kind of binding the charge. And also just kind of routines, obsessive compulsive people bind the charge into tapping on doorknobs or washing their hands or, internal rituals that we do. We can bind the charge into repetitive thought loops, thoughts that go on and on forever.
Interesting. So the energy is coming both directions, right? There's energy, consciousness, Shiva, whatever you want to call it, energy coming downward. You have Shakti energy coming upward. And at any point, they can be hitting this binding, this kind of stuck energy that's tension or so let me make sure I understand that. So there's one which is like muscle contraction that I get. It's like kind of like my shoulders are tense.
Clench your jaws to not say something.
Yeah, that's my thing. Okay, so jaws maybe like where I hold my tension in my body. And then there's drinking. So how does and a heavier frame. So let's say I'm kind of someone who feels energy a lot. Like I'm like a shaking twig. So I'm just like when energy gets through me, I'm like, like kind of like an unstable twig leaf shaking all over the place, right? But I can see if you have more weight, it has more gravitas, and like the energy comes, and you're like have a larger area to distribute the energy, maybe a larger pipe, I guess, coming through.
Yeah. It actually desensitizes you in a way because the thin people are more sensitive. And that's why they
Uh,
tend to withdraw from life a little bit more. The larger
uh,
people, they can take it. They can put up with.
that's interesting because my teacher, who is this Kundalini teacher, he's like he didn't even start off big, but everyone who ends up in that job ends up being big because they can hold the energy more.
Oh, then they're creating a large body to ground. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So I'm kind of a so then I understand the different body types and how that would affect energy. And then drinking, then how does that is it kind of like you
Drinking is an interesting thing. There is the act of drinking,
Mhm.
which is, being social and having a drink in your
Right,
hand, feeling that there's something to, smoking would be a similar thing, or
right.
even eating. And then there's what alcohol, if we're talking about alcohol, does to you, is actually alcohol loosens the inhibitions that we naturally have in our brain that
Ah,
that, don't say that. And when people are really drunk, they don't have those inhibitions. That's why they get into a fight or they cry or they yell or they, do things because they're uninhibited. That's a temporary release of charge.
I see. So it's like this the binding can release so the energy can go
Yeah.
up a little bit. So it's a releasing of the binding, not necessarily a
Yeah.
battle
The
like the
thing
muscle.
is, it doesn't really work though,
Yeah.
because you're not terribly conscious when you're doing it. You're not releasing, the anger you had at your dad, for example. You're trying to beat up the guy in the bar.
Right.
So and then you forget the next day, or and you have to do it over and over again. So it's something that puts it in a cycle of releasing and being tied up and then getting drunk again to release, but it doesn't heal.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So and then the other is like kind of repetitive thought, which I had a terrifying moment yesterday. So I
Oh
was
dear.
so excited to talk to you. The terrifying moment was I was writing through like five different articles, all about different kind of topics, and somehow I'd write the article, and then it would end up talking about my dad's death, and it would be like a specific set of like three or four scenarios that I would write about, and I wrote these over a course of a year. So I didn't really remember what I wrote, but each time I'd think like, no, this doesn't belong in the article. I'd cut and paste it and put it into another document. When I did that, I realized that these and almost every one of these stories, I was writing the same thing. And you know when in that Jack Nicholson movie when he's writing red rum, it was like that situation where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been having this repetitive thought that I've captured on paper someplace over and over, like I'm compulsively telling the story over and over again. And I thought, so that's kind of a block, right? So it's coming
Well, it's an attempt to release the charge around that event.
right.
And that's why we tell our stories over and over again, because we're trying to release the charge. But then
Okay.
what happens is we focus on the story. Oh, do you know what happened to me today? I got to tell you about it. We focus on the story and we ignore what the charge is doing in our own body.
Okay, that makes sense. So I had body work done yesterday and it's in my throat. Like it's in my throat, it was in my
Yeah.
heart, it was in my second chakra and it just wasn't. And I was like, what the heck is this story doing in all these different places? But I can see that this kind of obsessive thinking that I was having because I wanted to discharge and tell someone the story, and I
Yeah.
haven't necessarily, it was blocking and then kind of being stored as tension in different parts of my body.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. That's fascinating. Okay, so
So
when,
often a discharge around something like that is the emotional discharge of it.
yeah.
The grief you felt that you maybe didn't express fully, or the anger you felt, or the fear you felt, or it's often that the emotion didn't get to complete.
Okay. Yeah, this is about my dad's death. So it's about not
Sure.
expressing grief, being angry that he died, like those kinds of things have happened throughout the course of 25, like he died 25 years ago. I'm shocked that this is still there, but it's still, there's something to be discharged, an
Yeah.
emotion to be discharged. And
Yeah.
maybe it's a story, but there's something to discharge. And when that happens, I can relax.
So the
That's
point
true.
would be when you're working on these articles or talking about this, even now, where do you feel the charge in your body right now?
Um, I feel blockage in my throat.
Yeah, yeah. So this is about there's something you wanted to say, and it may be not even around the death. It may be something you always wanted to say to your father and never got heard from when you
Yeah.
were 5 years old. Uh,
Yes.
truth you didn't get to
Mm,
express, and sometimes it's about expressing something. And when expressing something, there's also something children have a longing to hear.
oh.
So in my live chakra workshops, my 7-day intensive, we do an exercise where you look and say, underneath everything you say and underneath everything you do, what are you really trying to say? So that's the first thing. And most people get down to what they're trying to say is love me, or I accept you for who you are. Or, they're trying to say, I'm okay, am I safe, something like that. And then we
Yeah.
say, and so what are you longing to hear?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then we have the whole group, they get in front of the whole group and say what they're longing to say,
Ah.
what they're longing to hear, and the whole group chants back to them what they're longing to hear.
I read that in the book, and that sounds fabulous because it's like, I'm sorry, I've loved you, you're safe, like all the kinds of things that you want your parent to say. And I realized mine is, I'm sorry, because I'm just so, I think, pissed off. I didn't realize how pissed off I was, but as we were talking about it, I think and I'm sure you're a healer, so it's just like, okay, here it comes.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm pissed off that he died in the way that he did, and I feel sad that he died the way that he did. But
yeah,
there's this kind of like, uh, you're safe, and I'm sorry. So I can see like people echoing that around would be very, very healing. So I can
yeah,
see how if you have, going back to what we were talking about, if you actually have some type of binding, that happens, that your energy is tense and stops. So this ideal flow doesn't, it can't flow, and yet your body is trying to speak to you, right? Like I've not been able to breathe. My neck, I can't turn fully, which is
uh,
what, that's a physical manifestation that I've tried everything. And then I thought it must be energetic because I've tried everything, chiropractic, PT, it's got to be energetic. And yesterday I was like, oh my God, it is energetic. I didn't realize it's all kind of culminating at this moment where I thought, oh, it's energetic that this is happening. So there's a binding, and then what's the over? Is the overbound? So there's binding, and then there's another thing that you overbind.
yeah. And if you
Overbound.
bind or don't bind, you can become overbound or underbound.
Yeah. What
An
does that mean?
overbound person, we know an overbound person is kind of tense. We might say they're uptight. Their
Yes.
body is very, muscularly tense.
Yes.
They're, they might pace or be restless. They're just all bound up and they don't have a lot of freedom. But you also have an underbound person. An underbound person is like too loose. They don't have very much energy. They
Mm,
don't have any organization in what they do. Oh, well, whatever. It's going to be okay. I'll figure it out when I get there. Um,
mm,
it's like they don't have enough of that binding. They don't have enough energy.
mm. Interesting. So then you have in that scenario you have high charge situations with a highly bound or overbound person, a high charge situation with an underbound person, and there are four different permutations.
Right.
So let's go through. I'm a high charge person, as you noted by my jaw. So I'm a high charge person in a high charge situation. In a high charge situation, can you explain the different scenarios?
Sure. So a high charge situation could be a situation of great responsibility, great complexity, or challenge.
Hmm.
So if you got a lot of kids at home, that's a high charge situation. If you've got some crisis that just happened, oh, I got to go deal with that. That's a high charge situation. If you're the CEO of a company, or like just a couple days ago, I gave a keynote at a conference and stood in front of 500 people, that was a high charge situation,
Right,
right? Um, if you have enough charge inside, you can meet that. There's a match.
right.
You spend your charge dealing with the crisis, dealing with the complexity, running the company. There's a good match. But when you take a high charge person and you take them out into the country on a meditation retreat, and they sit down to meditate, they're like jumping out of their skin.
Like, oh my God, how much longer? Has it been 5 minutes? How long? Is this here for an hour?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because the low charge on the outside, it's like the high pressure on the inside, it feels like they're going to pop.
Right. Yeah, you use the example of like going hiking and like, or going up in the airplane, you're like, like
Yeah,
there's
so
a
the
difference in
pressure goes
pressure.
on your bag of potato chips, or your bag of potato chips pops out when the air pressure is lower.
Yeah.
So by the same token, a low charge person in a high charge situation, let's say you're really exhausted and depleted, and you show up at work and there's a big crisis to handle,
Yeah.
then a low charge person is going to feel overwhelmed. Oh my God, I don't have enough charge to meet this.
Mm,
I'm
mm.
overwhelmed with too many demands. Life is asking more of me than I have inside. So it kind of implodes and we go more towards a collapse.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay.
Whereas a low charge person at a meditation retreat, they're just fine.
God, I hate those people. Yeah, they're kind of like, what's the big deal? And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. All right, so then you move into character structures that you talk about, which I found fascinating because I didn't even know that there are character structures, but as you describe them, I started to understand them. So, what are the ideas of character structures? What are they?
Okay, so when we're born, we have a tremendous amount of charge. All you have
Hmm.
to do is look at a young child running around, making noise, jumping up and down, and you see that we're full of energy. And then what happens? We're told, sit down, be quiet, you're too much, hold it all in. Who do you think you are? Quiet, whatever. We're told to shrink in our charge,
Right,
or we're told different things in different
right,
families.
right.
And as we're born and grow up, we are also creating our body.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have to bind the charge, we bind it into the body as we're growing ourselves. So
Mm,
then it becomes part of the structure, part of the hardware.
mm, mm.
So, for example, someone that's wounded in their very first coming into this life, at birth, in the first 6 months, they don't feel safe, they don't get enough, but mostly they don't feel safe. They don't
Right.
feel touched and anchored and grounded in the
Call them
world.
schizoid.
I call that the
Schizoid
schizoid.
structures. Yeah.
They find all the charge up into their head. They're
Mm.
always trying to figure it out. They pull it out
Ah.
of their body, and in pulling it out of their body, they have a thinner body that feels overwhelmed, right, by
Ah.
everything. And the more overwhelmed they feel, the more they go into their head to try and figure it out. The more they're in their head, the less they get what they need on a body level. So it's part
Ah.
of the structure of the body. And then when they're grown up, they say, okay, now I want to be in my body, but I don't have these channels open.
Ah. Okay. So that's what. So the trick is, in that case, going back to the chakras, which is a good portion in the book. You talk all about chakras, and I know when you're coming to East West, you're going to be talking about that. So I wanted to cover some of the things that you aren't going to be talking about. I think there, but you talk about. So let's say that I am a schizoid. I know that that's one of the things I relate to, being a schizoid and a psychopath.
Uh-huh. Few people would admit that. That's why I like to call the psychopath actually the challenger.
Okay, but
Because
I am a psychopath. But if you go and a schizoid, so when you have a schizoid, so if you go back to the core, I'm kind of not in my body. I just kind of whoop, go all the way to
right.
the top.
And that's why when charge comes in, you shake like a leaf. I mean, that's what I
Ah,
said earlier, because
yes.
your body's not absorbing the charge. So I have
Okay.
an exercise for schizoids to actually expand the core. Then there's room for their charge to drop down. And all of a sudden they go, oh my God, I'm here on the planet for the first time, or I'm in my body for the first time.
Right.
It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, so I feel like what's happened from doing this Kundalini sadhana is that at first I used to shake a lot, and then I was able to use my breath to moderate the shaking. And now I don't know because I assume that your Kundalini energy is always running. It's not like turned off at
Right.
any point. I know it gets activated, but it's running at some level. Even when it's activated, it's still turned on. That it must be a bandwidth issue, using your computer analogy, that once you get a bigger bandwidth, let's say that
Exactly.
my bandwidth may have been small before, but as I'm getting more Kundalini and expanding, then I have a bigger bandwidth, and therefore I don't shake as much, but the energy is still
Precisely.
running. Okay.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, you can even think of it like a wire. A very skinny wire can only handle so much voltage.
Right.
But, when you've got a big power tool or something, you want a heavier extension cord, you want a heavier wire so it can handle the voltage.
Right. Yeah, it's like modem versus right now whatever Comcast is that has
Yeah,
installed.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the kind of equivalent because it has an electrical charge and it's
yeah.
literally running up and down. Okay. So that's a schizoid, and then what's the oh, do we don't have,
The
let's
next
talk.
one is the
Yeah.
oral.
Yeah. Let's talk about the
So the
oral.
oral gets fixated between like 6 months and 2 years when the child is really outer focused.
Mm,
Feed me, touch me, take care of me, guide me, show
mm,
me the world. And that child, for whatever reason, didn't get enough. They
mm,
didn't get fed enough. They were the youngest in a whole bunch of kids and they didn't get enough attention. Both their parents worked and didn't really have time. It could have been attention, it could have been food, it could have been touch, but any of those basic elements, they didn't get enough. So they didn't fill
mm,
up with charge. And so an oral goes around kind of undercharged, and that means they kind of collapse and they
mm,
feel like everything's too much. And they're still trying to get their fix.
mm,
So when they're in relationship, an oral meets a new person, comes into therapy, oh, I met him or her, I'm happy, everything's fine. So they
uh,
get charged from that, but then they expect too much from their relationship. And the other person goes, oh, you're too needy, I'm out of here. And they fall and collapse again.
okay. I have new information for friends of mine.
So
Okay, so
the
that's
feeling is for the oral to find their ground and fill up their own energy, take
right.
responsibility for filling up.
Right, versus like we were talking about, if you're not in your core, you're going out and like trying to
Yes,
fill your core
exactly.
from
Yeah.
out externally back in. Okay, and then there's the endure. Um, do we have
Yeah.
enough? Yeah, do you mind if we go a little bit longer? Do you have
Oh,
till?
it's
Yeah,
fun.
okay, okay, yeah. And then we have the endure.
So
Um,
the juror gets wounded at around 18 months to 3 years. And that's the stage where the child is going into their terrible twos, the me, mine, no, I don't want to, having their temper tantrums. That's the stage where a child is differentiating. And it's actually a really important third chakra awakening stage.
mm,
But in some families, it's don't do that,
right.
don't let that out. Or maybe they had to endure something really difficult that went on for years and years, like an abusive parent or
Mm,
invasive parent or, poverty or danger or something like that. And they couldn't let anything out. So they learned to just hunker down and put up with it because they had no choice.
okay.
So, in order to do that, they kind of suppress the flow of charge in the body.
I
Yeah.
love this picture because the pictures help a lot. So this is Endure. I'm sorry I didn't show the other pictures, but get the
Yeah.
book if you want. But
Yeah.
yeah, so this is the picture of where it may actually manifest physically. Interesting.
Exactly, exactly. So rounded shoulders, tucked in butt, thickening around the midsection. And that's where they hunker down in order to take it. And the gift of the endurer is they're very loyal, they're very
Mm,
responsible, they don't fly off the handle, you can count on them. The curse of the endurer is they're not very happy. They tend
mm,
toward depression because actually the classic name for the endurer is the masochist. They
mm,
hurt themselves. And so
mm.
yourself, you're not very happy.
Oh, now I have other people I want to talk to about this. Okay. And how
You
about this?
look like that.
All right, and this is me, the psychopath.
Okay. So I like to call it the challenger because we think of, a psychopath as somebody that, embezzles money or,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. I'm
it
not an
molests
embezzler.
children. And,
Right.
there's a lot of people who are that character structure who are not they're not a psychopath by
Right.
any means. But a psychopathic structure, the challenger, they have quite a bit of charge.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a situation, it's sometimes called the betrayed child,
Mm-hmm.
where something happened to them that made them think, I'm never going to let that happen again.
Mm-hmm.
I was overpowered. I was manipulated, I was used, whatever. And I'm going to become powerful so no one will ever do that to me again. In fact, I'm going to do whatever it takes. Now, whatever it takes can vary from person to person. For a person who's totally on the far end, extreme end of the psychopath, whatever it takes can be lying, cheating, stealing, and they feel like they have a right to it. On the milder, healthier form, whatever it takes can be, I'll work myself to the bone.
Yes.
I will not be vulnerable. I don't trust people. I'll have to do everything myself because I can't really trust people to have my back.
Exactly.
And then they work themselves into exhaustion.
Right.
And get a lot of stress around the shoulders and the neck.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So that is, and so the trick with that is to actually be vulnerable, right? What?
Yeah, to be vulnerable, to come down in your lower chakras, to admit your needs, to allow people to help you. I have a terrible time allowing people to help me. And then I complain, I got to do everything myself.
Exactly. Okay, got it. So that's basically what and then the last one is the rigid.
The last one is called the rigid.
This is my husband.
Okay. Yeah. And mind you, of course, these are, I picked female for some and male, but, the character structures can be male or female.
Yes.
We all have them.
Yes.
And the rigid is the good boy or good girl. Mm-hmm. They learn to follow the rules. And they were raised with the idea of, I will love you when you do everything right. And if you can't do things right, go to your room and come out when you can be nice. And so the family had very rigid rules. There's certain cultures that are more rigid than others. And, the rigid is very good at succeeding. They put their energy into achievement and accomplishment and keeping everything nice and neat and clean and ordered. And they're very regimented in their behavior, but and so they're good. They usually make money. They're usually attractive. Their bodies are pretty well proportioned. They're like what the society says is an ideal way to be. But the tragedy is they don't often know exactly who they are inside. They have a hard time acknowledging, what do I really want? What do I really feel? I'm just so busy following the rules that I don't know who's in there. It's the tragedy of the rigid.
Interesting. And so these actually gives us a sense, this is how all the chakras that you're going to be talking about in the East West bookstore, they're all related to the chakra. So
Absolutely.
The first one that we talked about is about the first chakra. And so is that right?
So wounding of the first chakra.
Right. Whereas the second one, which is kind of like, it's about second chakra kinds of stuff.
They didn't get enough touching, feeling, all those oral things at the oral stage, what Freud's psychosocial stages, the anal, the oral, or, the oral, then it's the anal. So they didn't get enough at that oral stage. So that's a second chakra wounding. The endure is a third chakra wounding.
Yes. And then what would be for the achiever? Would that be a...
Achiever is a fourth chakra wounding.
Oh, so it has to do with their heart.
Their heart. I will only love you when you do it right.
Well, that just hurt my heart just thinking about that. Because I'm not an achiever, but I was thinking, oh, my poor husband.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So that actually helps us. It gives you a sense, and you can go to the East West bookstore because I know you're going to be talking about. So you're coming and you're going to do an intro on Friday, May 25th, and then the 26th. I think you're talking about chakras 1, 2, and 3.
That's
and then on that Sunday, you'll be talking about 4, 5, 6, and 7?
4, 5, 6, and 7. That's right.
Okay, got it. So you can get the book, figure out which of these structures you are. I think you could just look at the picture and go, that's me. But what's interesting is, like, at least in my case, there's 2, right? There's the one that's kind of the shaking of the leaf, schizoid, and then also the psychopath. So at least you have some things that you could kind of focus on. So I may go on Saturday to focus on my first chakra issue, and Saturday, and then come on Sunday to I guess I just come on Saturday for the first and the third chakra.
Well, actually, we're encouraging people to do the whole thing because if they don't get the grounding, I don't want them going into the upper chakras.
Yeah. Okay. So what do they get when they come? What's kind of an experience? What would they get experientially?
Well, we're going to be working with exercises that that are charging and discharging for the chakras.
Okay.
Some of that involves some yoga, or yoga in combination with bioenergetic exercises. So how do you bring energy into your system? How do you discharge? Because some people need to charge up, they're deficient. Some people need to discharge, they have too much and they need to let it out. So we'll be doing both at each chakra level. We'll be doing partner poses with each other to experience that, breathing exercises. And it's all about charging and discharging your chakras as a way to come into balance.
Okay, so in yoga terms, it sounds like there's some kind of pranayamic stuff. There's yoga asanas, and then
Yeah.
other kinds. I saw like EFT as part of it, as part of the kinds of things, and then I assume like there's all sorts of energetic holdings, and I assume that that's going to energy psychology things as well. Is that
Yes,
part of this
that's
stuff?
right.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
excellent. Thank you so much. So you're coming to Seattle. If folks didn't get that already, you're coming to Seattle at the East West Bookstore. You're going to be here May 25th, 26th, and 27th. And the 25th is an introductory event, and then the 26th and 27th is the two events that we talked about. Thank
Yes.
you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, CJ. It's just a delight when someone's actually read the book to do.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show, and love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.